Welcome back to the Mindful of You podcast. This is episode 35, The Toddler in Your Mind. So I have gotten to spend a little bit of time around toddlers in my life. I'm the youngest, so I didn't have any baby sisters, brothers, or anything, but my husband's got quite a few nieces and nephews. None of them, actually no, two of them are more toddler age right now, and then I've got a nephew, that's my sister's kid, who's very much toddler age, and it's the cutest thing ever. And I always say that he's my best friend. I'm not his best friend, but he's just stinking cute. So toddlers are very cute, but I don't know if anyone would disagree with me if I said, if a toddler manages to get a permanent marker in their hand and is running to a wall, that you wouldn't run as fast as you can to grab that permanent marker. So I'm sure there's lots of hacks on the internet for getting permanent marker off of walls, because I'm sure it's happened more times than anybody would like. So I heard this phrase or analogy probably from Jody Moore, not sure where she got it from, about having a toddler in your brain, and basically comparing our thoughts to that of a toddler with a marker in their hand writing on the walls. So it is very easy not to moderate or notice what it is we are thinking. But what we are thinking, in my experience, has a major impact on how we feel and what we do, and creates a lot of our reality. Our thinking is directly tied most of the time to our perception of a situation, and that can really skew or create our reality. So it is not ideal for a toddler with a sharpie to be creating our reality. And Jody basically talks about this analogy as being what an unregulated or I don't mean unregulated in the scientific sense, more in the just sense that we aren't watching our thoughts or watching what we think about ourselves or about other people. Now, we definitely don't want to constantly be monitoring our thoughts, but if we are consistently feeling bad or negative about ourselves or a certain situation, it might be a good idea to check out what's going on in there. If there's a toddler with a Sharpie who is writing things on the walls that we don't want in the walls of our brain. So, first, I wanted to talk about what a thought is. So we all have a bajillion trillion thoughts a day. I don't know the actual number. Somebody's probably studied this. I don't know. But a thought is something that cannot be proven in a court of law, is how I've chosen to define a thought. So basically, it is a statement or something that comes into our head that is no more than an opinion or one way to see something. So a couple of examples of a thought. An example of a thought would be, I'm not good enough. This is probably a thought most of us have had at one time or another, and it is just that. It's a thought. It's not a fact. Another example of a thought is, I'm not very good with people. This is an interesting one because it might come from a story that you've consistently told yourself, which is like, oh, I'm socially awkward, or I'm not good at talking to people, or I don't have patience for people. I'm just not very good with people. Now, just because it is a thought doesn't mean it can't be true, but it also doesn't mean that it is true or has to be true. You can choose to believe something else and make that your reality. So what I'm trying to point out here is it's important not to accept our thoughts immediately as fact, which I believe is our natural tendency. So some of our thoughts just happen internally. They're just things that we we think, or is like almost a knee-jerk reaction to a situation. But a lot of times they might be influenced by external factors like social media or TV, or the people around us, our families, our religion, our belief system. A lot of these things influence what we think and what we believe. If we are consistently consuming things that are not positive or making us think positive things about ourselves or our lives, those thoughts are going to be repeated in our heads. And even if we don't know it, we are accepting them as a fact. So a good way to gauge where to start working on your thoughts is an area where you have a lot of tension, sadness, anxiety, overwhelm, or anger. Once you have thought of an area where that is the case, for example, could be work, could be your marriage, could be your relationship with your parents, could be a myriad of things. But once you've thought of an area, you want to specify something within that area. So for example, if the area is work, you'd want to think of maybe the last time you felt anxious at work. And then you'd want to write down all of the thoughts you have surrounding that instance. So I've heard this referred to before as a brain dump. So basically you're just writing down all the things that you're thinking about this that could be causing these feelings of anxiety, sadness, or frustration. Then you want to take a look at these thoughts. A lot of them you might think are facts, or right off the bat, it might be like, no, that's just true. Like, that's just what it is. But most of the time, things aren't facts. So you really want to push back when it comes to your thoughts, especially if it's one that's not making you feel very good. So for example, my boss doesn't like me is not a fact. Even if they say, I do not like you, it can't be a fact because it can't be proven. The fact would be, or the circumstance in this situation would be, my boss said, I do not like you. So likely you're still not going to feel super great about that. So you don't necessarily have to change your thought right away, but it's important to make your thoughts or look at your thoughts and see them as neutrally as you possibly can. So you want to pore over them and decide if they are thoughts or if they're facts. So something that's really important here is you don't have to necessarily create a new thought right away or try to believe something that you don't believe. We don't need to jump to extremes. So for example, say somebody just got fired from their job and they're sad about that. And maybe they have this thought that's like, man, things just never go right for me. Things never go right for me, or something like that. And if they were working with a coach or something, they might say, well, is that true? Or are you sure that's what you want to believe? And a knee-jerk reaction might be to jump to the other extreme and be like, well, what do you want me to think? You want me to think this is a good thing? Or do you want me to think like being fired from my job is just fine and dandy? And this is where toxic positivity can come in, which is never what I want to promote. I never want people to think that they have to be happy about circumstances they deem as negative, or to be happy all the time. What we're trying to recognize here is that however you're feeling or whatever you're thinking is a choice. It's not always a conscious choice, but it is a choice. And so we can create new thoughts or a progression of new thoughts. So for example, in the situation of things never go right for me, they may want to create a progression of new thoughts. So maybe they want to believe that, well, maybe this isn't the worst thing that could have happened. Or maybe they want to think, instead of focusing on that, maybe they want to think, I'm glad I got a good severance package, and just kind of do like a redirect. Or they could think, this gives me a chance to take care of some things at home while I look for work. So it doesn't necessarily have to tie directly to what the original thought was. But what I'm trying to say is you don't necessarily have to jump from, oh, not getting fired from my job is a good thing, or I'm so happy I got fired from my job, because that's not what we want. And you're not going to believe it anyway, right? The goal is to help you to find thoughts that you believe to be true. So I recently had a situation working with a student I was struggling with, and I had a lot of negative thoughts surrounding myself, surrounding the student situation, and surrounding my job. And I remember thinking something like this is, or no, I remember thinking something like, this student is so rude, or something like that, or like, this student is so disrespectful. And then as I went back over the situation, I was like, I don't know if she necessarily said anything that was inherently rude or disrespectful, but because I was uncomfortable, that is how I was viewing the situation. And even if she had said something that was rude or disrespectful, I don't have to walk around thinking that all day, because that doesn't feel very good. So I could simply think about something else, or think, I did my best to handle a difficult student situation today, or I'm glad I have a job where these situations don't come up super often. So again, I'm not necessarily switching on a dime and being like, oh, that student was so nice to me, because that doesn't feel true to me. But I also don't have to walk around thinking the bad or negative thought that's going to make me feel kind of crappy all day. So I also don't want you guys to get caught in like the don't think about pink elephants trap of like, oh, like just don't think about it or whatever. But it's also true that you don't necessarily have to think about things that don't make you feel good. It's okay to put your energy into other things. So it's a very, very basic introduction to some thought work, which I think I've gone over before, but I would encourage you to think of some situations where you are not feeling good and physically write down your thoughts surrounding the matter and challenge those a little bit. Now, you don't necessarily have to jump straight to new thoughts or jump straight to doing thought work. A lot of the awareness is going to give you some sense of relief of like, there might be other options out there. Like, I maybe don't have to feel like this about this anymore. And if you try it with a situation and it feels too icky, like you don't feel ready, and like you feel like you're pushing yourself to believe things you don't want to believe, try it with something else that feels a little bit less intense and test it out there. So write down all of those thoughts, read through them, decide, is this a thought or is this a fact? If it's a thought, how is that thought making you feel? Is it something you want to keep, or is it something you want to work on letting go of? So anyway, that's all for this week. I really appreciate you guys listening, and I will talk to you next week. Bye-bye.